Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Francisco Ugarte. He is immigration attorney at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. Am I getting your title correct?
You got it. That's
All
it.
right. So, seemed like a good time to have a discussion with you, since immigration is one of the key aspects of what's now happening under the new Trump administration. So, for you, what do things look like on the ground, and what does your work generally entail?
Sure, I'd be happy to answer. And I think it is a key aspect, but it's also a key distraction to get the country to fight each other so they can get away with what they're trying to get away with. But in terms of on the ground, it's interesting. Not a lot has changed on the ground for immigration lawyers. We've seen some policy changes at the highest levels. The first week of the Trump administration, we saw a big increase in arrests, particularly people who were checking in with immigration as obligated to do, to let them know that they're around, they're complying with whatever orders that immigration is giving them. And surprise, surprise, ICE placed individuals under arrest. We heard that there are new arrest quotas for each field office to simply make arrests. Anytime you hear arrest quotas, bad idea, right? You're just making police make arrests for no apparent reason. It's just arrest as many people as you can. And within a day or two, there was detention capacity issues. And so we saw a slowdown of those arrests. There's been very little legal change. There's a recent change on the Lake and Riley Act, and I'm happy to talk about that. But the biggest change has been fear and panic and rhetoric. You hear mass deportation. You hear about these things. Trump's going to send people to Guantánamo or El Salvador or Panama. We've been getting lots of calls from people asking what's going on, asking for consultations. And, you know, I spoke at a staff meeting and I introduced myself as Francisco, but I'm changing my name to Power, Not Panic, because it is so vital right now that we understand our power as human beings in this country, that we have a plethora of rights to assert. Immigrants have a lot of rights, due process rights, rights to challenge their case. And we're being kind of collectively gaslit by the national media that's kind of following everything Trump is doing. Very few stories you see in national media around resistance, around people who are protesting these policies. Amazing immigration stories. Our sanctuary ordinance in San Francisco is as strong as it's ever been. Our legal service provider networks in San Francisco are way stronger than I've ever seen it before. So I think that we're a formidable opponent, and we're just getting our act together, kind of, to figure out what we're going to do. And make no mistake, there is an assault happening to our legal system and to the rule of law. And it's up to us, the people of this country, and I include all people, to defend fundamental rights.
So, I mean, we've heard a lot about things like mass deportation, which, I find interesting just because, like, she's not even hiding the language is right out of Nazi Germany, right? Like, I mean, there's like no disguising this, right? And then there are these ideas that they're going to send people to Guantanamo, which, of course, we all know what happened there 20 years ago during the quote unquote war on terror. And, you know, I guess from my perspective, one of my biggest concerns, and I'm sure you share that, is what happens to the rule of law? I mean, are we really going to have to rely on litigating case by case, piece by piece? Is that really what this is going to come down to?
Well, every action has a reaction. So if they literally try to send people to Guantanamo, there are two kind of main recourses. One is political and organizing. So reaching out to your congressperson, reaching out, doing everything you can, uh, going to the press to share stories of the people that are being sent there. But then the other is legal and to challenge people in court. And it it we've litigated transfers for many years in immigration. I remember when I started at the public defender's office, there used to be a detention center in Martinez, California, in Contra Costa, and ICE one day just decided to close it down and transfer everybody to Colorado at a Colorado detention facility. And so we filed a lawsuit to prevent that from happening. We didn't prevail, but we got a great dicta from the court saying this was outrageous, essentially. And eventually we were able to keep the cases in the Bay Area with Bay Area judges. Point being that if there are governmental actions that are illegal, a recourse is to file suit. I think the bigger problem is that the Trump administration is quite effective at getting its enemies or the people who are not on his side to deliver his talking points. And so the seeds are planted, and then in organizations like the New York Times or the Associated Press or even Fox News, they just write what they say. And then they write a long article about what would happen if this happened. And then suddenly all of us are talking about it. And you see these big media companies now settling frivolous lawsuits, like the CBS was sued by the Trump administration for editing out or a statement from Kamala Harris to make her look more favorably. I mean, this is stuff the media has been doing for years. It's not illegal, but they want to settle the lawsuit. And of course, a lot of frontline journalists are completely outraged at that, the vast majority. But I think we're seeing a corporate consolidation of the media, very, very not only afraid of taking on Trump, but probably their executives are in cahoots with them. And so if we think about, well, how are we getting to these ideas like mass deportation, and it does sound very fascist. It's happening not just from the government, it's also happening through media, it's happening through social media, it's happening through corporate control of virtually every kind of outlet that we have today. And so we have to realize this, and we have to fight back, because the vast majority of people in this country, I really, really strongly believe this, do not want mass deportation. This is a country that was formed to stop federal agents roaming neighborhoods and stealing people away. Like, that's a Bill of Rights. We have a Fourth Amendment. We have a Second Amendment. We have a First Amendment. The whole idea of this country is designed to prevent governmental outreach. And somehow they've turned the tables on this to say, oh, well, the Constitution requires deportation. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. And so we have a duty right now to stand up and defend the principles upon which this country was founded. Some of the good principles, of course, there's a lot of contradiction in the principles that founded this country. We have slavery, women's rights, etc. But if you look at that Bill of Rights, it's a pretty remarkable document. In fact, it's so remarkable that Donald Trump took advantage of it in his legal cases. So,
So it sounds like you're an optimist.
there's nowhere else to go, David. Where else are we going to go? Like go into the bedroom and sleep all day, or just feel like everything is we have to have confidence in each other. Even the people who maybe you may disagree with. I think compassion is a part of who we are as human beings. And the people who are running the show believe that they're doing the right thing, and they perhaps there are some with very, very nefarious goals, but we've been through very bad situations before in this country, in society, and we figured out ways to get through them. And right now, you have to believe that we can do things. And this is also from the first Trump administration. Like Trump promised to build a big wall that Mexico would pay for. He promised to take away DACA, this beautiful program for kids, undocumented kids who came in when they were young and didn't have any other legal avenue to regularize. He promised to take that away. He promised to take away temporary protected status. And all those things he failed on. And he didn't fail. We stepped up and fought back, and the right decision, the right result happened. A lot of harm was created. There's no doubt about that. A lot of families were separated. We saw that. The rhetoric changed, but we won. And if you look at DACA, for example, a lot of people were worried at the time that DACA would be taken away. And of course, the Trump administration tried to take it away. I always felt that whole time, having worked with people with DACA, having been through the Obama years of mass deportation. By the way, Obama remains the president who has deported more people than any other president in US history. I saw kids go into senator offices and put their lives on the line, in civil disobedience actions to insist on some form of regularization of their status. Obama couldn't make a speech by that last part of his tenure without young kids, amazing, talented, intelligent, vibrant kids, protesting him on his immigration policies. And that made a huge difference. And I thought to myself, how on earth is Trump going to take away DACA when probably in virtually any circle in the Republican Party, there are people who have DACA? I mean, any company that hires folks, there are people with DACA. And, it's this idea, and it goes back to my earlier point around distraction. I really do believe immigration is a distraction, that there's so many points in our collective dialogue around politics where there are instigators of hate. Like we're supposed to hate immigrants, or white people are supposed to hate black people, or vice versa, and these passions are inflamed, and then suddenly all we're doing is fighting each other while the rich are stealing our money and going into our social security accounts and like giving tax breaks for the corporations. And I think we really have to see the humanity in each other and do our best to stay strong, get in the streets, protest, do what we need to do.
So talk a little bit about your work, because I think a lot of people, first of all, would be surprised to learn that public defenders' offices have immigration, departments, or however you would characterize it. And then second, how does the work that you do bleed into the work of a general public defender's office, where they're defending, criminal defendants from charges from prosecutors? You're kind of defending them from collateral consequences from some of those charges?
Thank you. Great question. So, interestingly enough, public defenders are governed by a state law in California, and every person accused of a crime has the right to appointed counsel if they can't afford a lawyer. And so our whole system, the Gideon decision, is designed to make sure people have a right to defend against an accusation because jail is threatened. So, but interestingly, in California, in addition to assisting in criminal defense, there's a provision that says, upon request, the public defender shall defend any person who is not financially able to employ counsel in any civil litigation, which, in the judgment of the public defender, the person is being persecuted or unjustly harassed. So California is like kind of a visionary understanding of what a public defender is. If someone is being persecuted or unjustly harassed, a public defender, what a great concept, by the way. Public defender. You have an entity that the government supports to make sure that people who are being unfairly or harassed or face state sanction have a right to a defense and have a right to due process. So if you look at immigration and deportation, during the Obama years, there were about 2 million people deported. We have a vast network of immigration detention system, a vast network of court systems, and you have immigrants, the people who are deported. There were statistics between 2010 and 2012 of those deported. 50% of the people deported had a U.S. citizen child. Another 50% had lived here 10 years or longer. So the Supreme Court has held deportation in and of itself is one of the most severe penalties the law can impose. And yet, an immigrant facing deportation can go before a judge, and if they can't afford to hire an attorney, they actually have to represent themselves. And that's also included if someone is in detention. So it's kind of crazy that someone arrested on a misdemeanor petty theft case where the maximum penalty is like a month or so in jail, if that, likely probation, whatever, they get in a lawyer, but someone facing banishment potentially to a country in which they could be killed or persecuted, where they've lived their entire lives in the United States and they have family here, they don't get a lawyer. So this didn't used to be such a big deal in the past, pre-1996, because there were only about 10, 20,000 people getting deported per year. But what happened in 1996 is that laws changed following a very anti-Mexico, anti-Latino sentiment in this country. Bill Clinton switched sides, joined the Republicans, and created these new draconian laws and led to the construction of this new deportation infrastructure. So more and more and more and more people found themselves in deportation. September 11th also happened, and rather than focusing on the threat of international terrorism, politicians used September 11th to advance a deportation enforcement infrastructure. And by the way, there's a lot of profiteering off of this stuff. A lot of billionaire companies building detention facilities and hoping for more and more people because they get rich that way. And that is a motive when we're looking at immigration enforcement. So the concept is people are facing huge stakes in this country. Their taxpayers are contributing members of the community. Should there be an obligation to assure due process? And I don't know if you've experienced this, but so many people in California have known someone to get deported. And, our legal system also has prevented, like Congress has not created legalization programs. So they don't make it easy for someone to immigrate here. So we have this contradiction happening in our country where we also depend on the labor of undocumented folks. By the way, one of the most profitable workforces in the history of humanity, certainly in agricultural industry. And yet we are saying we also want to deport them, even though our economy depends on this group of people. So So public defender, the reality is the deportation system is connected to the criminal justice system. And in 2010, under President Obama, for the first time, he opened the doors to sharing of criminal information, fingerprint information with ICE. And so in 2010, there was a decision under a program called Secure Communities to share fingerprint information for anybody arrested on a crime to ICE. And ICE would get notice of a person. They would check their fingerprints on their database. And if they believe that person was undocumented, they'd send what is called a detainer to the to a jail. And then that person would be held for deportation. And so public defenders started seeing their clients not get out on bail because there was an ICE detainer. And the vast majority of people getting into the system were people on very minor offenses, some people getting arrested but not prosecuted for charges. And so the criminal justice system became a funnel for deportation. And so the public defender's office is like a perfect place. It's used to dealing with high stakes cases. It used to deal with high volume cases. And Jeff Adachi, the late great Jeff Adachi, said, let's start doing that here, because that's what a public defender should do. So that's what it looks like. In terms of today, we have a sanctuary ordinance in San Francisco, so people aren't transferred from the jails to ICE. However, our clients are often targeted by ICE for arrest, and so we will follow up with individuals if they get arrested by ICE. If they're facing deportation, we'll handle the deportation case. And also, we provide representation for anyone detained and facing deportation who's a resident of San Francisco. So we handle those cases. So that's a really long answer. I'm sorry, David.
No,
Don't tell
it's
me
all
to shut
good.
up in the middle of it. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, you mentioned Jeff Adachi, who was an inspiration and a friend and a hero to me. And I wanted to say I wouldn't be here without Jeff Adachi, because it was watching what he was able to do in San Francisco that inspired me to realize what we could do with the Vanguard. And I know it was reciprocated on his part as well. So just wanted to mention that because I missed the guy.
That makes two of us, David. I mean,
Yes.
that guy gave me so much, and his death was so hard, but what he was able to do for me personally, and weird. I mean, just like so many people have this story too. I feel like Jeff was arguably one of the greatest lawyers to have ever graced this world, and I think that somebody needs to write a biography about him. And because it's like we all know what he was like. We all know he was like the best. But it's really important. There's always a battle for legacies and stuff. And so maybe you can write a biography on
Yes, in my spare time.
it.
So, and I think another point, getting back to immigration, is that people tend to think, this impacts quote unquote undocumented or quote unquote illegal, or people that do not have proper documentation to be here, which I have a lot of problems with the terminology, obviously, but I also have lots of problems with the conception that a lot of people think, oh, all these people are sneaking over the borders, and some are, but a lot of people are here legally, at least initially, and then they suffer collateral consequences because they commit a crime, and that puts their status in jeopardy. So it's not even necessarily people that are here because they shouldn't be here. It's people that are here that were supposed to be here. They've gone through all the processes, and then something happened.
That's right. You can be a lawful permanent resident, have lived here 60 years, been a lawful permanent resident for 40. You have one drug offense, like a possession, marijuana, cocaine, whatever, and suddenly you're looking at deportation. And there are a lot of different crimes, firearm, possession, offense, that can trigger deportation. And there really is a ton of misinformation on this topic, on immigration. And it's also like historical, I mean, a refusal to acknowledge history, and just a real, everybody, one side you hear, well, you have to follow the legal process, like follow the laws. And it's like, well, if you're changing the laws constantly, it's hard to know what the laws are. Like my family, I'm half Irish, half Spanish. My great grandfather was 18 years old. He got in a boat in Ireland. He didn't have papers. He got to New York and they stamped him in, right? That was paperless migration. He didn't have a visa, but they just let him in. And that used to happen quite a bunch. My other side of the family, my father's side, Spanish, and my great grandfather was accused of sedition by the new fascist government, Francisco Franco. And he was sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted, and he was imprisoned for 4 years in very hard conditions. And my family left and got essentially refugee status here. And many of the people who are coming into this country right now are in those two situations. They're, we say as immigration lawyers, the three main ways you want to immigrate: family, poverty, or war. And, poverty and war is why I'm here. And so many people have that story. And there's so many, there's also this idea that people coming from Latin America, like, we've never seen so many people come in, and it's, our country can't handle. It's like the percentage of foreign-born people in this country right now are 13.5%, thereabouts. It's growing a little bit. In 1900, the percentage was about that rate. It started going down. It reduced to about 7% in the 60s. But our per capita foreign-born population here is really no different than it used to be. And we are a country that was essentially formed by people not native to this land. And we've always kind of defined ourselves as a country of opportunity that attracts people from other places. And it's just kind of insane. But that's again why I do believe that the immigration concept that we're seeing in the press is a deliberate distraction from the ultra wealthy, who, of course, there's legitimate anti-immigrant sentiment here. Of course, that's being played out. But I do believe that many of the people that are actually promoting this controversy have no real stake in the game, and really want to leverage that to win elections, to build power, and keep working class people fighting each other. And that's really the thing that I would love to work on, David, more. Is I'm a lawyer. I know how to litigate an immigration case. I know how to defend people. I love my job. I love the people that I work with. I learned so much from my clients and my colleagues. But I really want to figure out a way to engage more in bridge building between citizens and immigrants, and working class citizens and immigrants, on how to recognize, our commonality. That's really hard to do. There aren't jobs really, but
Yeah. One thing that you were talking about your background, and like most people, my background is also, my family came over at the turn of the 20th century. They came from Eastern Europe. They were all Jews. They were fleeing pogroms where their villages were being massacred. And then pretty much everyone in my family that didn't come over at that time died in the Holocaust. So, like a lot of people don't understand is that a lot of the immigrants that come to the country are fleeing wars and famines and genocides and horrific conditions. And that's why they're coming. It's not like, they have a lot of good options. And so there seems to be this lack of understanding. Now, I think it was last year, the public defender's office had this very interesting press conference on this young man who was a client, who he was human trafficked from, I want to say, El Salvador, but I could be wrong, and brought up and exploited, and then got into drug dealing and all sorts of other stuff. And this was literally a kid. And like, you read these stories of how these people don't understand. Like, I was just reading this book, like 80% of women who come over as migrants have been sexually assaulted on the way. I mean, it's just horrific story after horrific story. The human rights scale here is unbelievable. And now we want to, send some of these folks back to these countries where they're escaping this stuff, where there's almost no doubt that they're going to get killed or exploited once they're back.
Yeah, it's a really irrational conversation that we're having in San Francisco around these issues. And first of all, if you care about data and statistics and objectivity, you will know that there's immigrants commit crimes at a less rate than citizens, and you will also know that deportation doesn't impact public safety. Like, there's no study out there showing higher deportation rates or higher collaboration between police and immigration creates a safer community. That makes a whole lot of sense because birthplace doesn't have anything to do with criminality. I talk to reporters all the time about this. Like, for example, the Lake and Riley, the tragedy that happened in Georgia. Let's not conflate birth status and immigration status to criminality. Okay, those two things are very different. And once you start writing about it and associate a Venezuelan immigrant to a crime, it's like you're stretching, and you're dangerously provoking prejudices, hatred, and assumptions about groups of people. There are situations, in San Francisco where, I mean, the drug trade has existed in San Francisco for as long as San Francisco has existed. Like, this is a seedy place. It's kind of interesting because it's like attracts seediness. It attracts like people who are ambitious, who want to go places. It's an interesting situation. And I also, by the way, the people who are very in favor of criminalizing drugs, the most outspoken people who are advocating for that today, at least the supervisor, has himself had a drug problem. And many of people who have been in recovery, sometimes those folks are very hardline about criminalizing. And I always find it really interesting. We all have a right to have an opinion about this. And I certainly have ways to go in my own understanding of things, and I always want to learn. But I do find it somewhat ironic that San Francisco has worked so hard to engage in harm reduction, to reduce criminal penalties for people who use drugs. And it's that progressive value that's interesting that has helped some of these folks get to the positions where they are, and now they're deciding that, oh, I don't like progressive policies anymore. I'm going to go as hard as I can and try and put drug dealers away for 10, 20 years. It's just it's tremendously ironic, and it reminds me of people who are families of immigrants who now want to shut the doors to the country after they already got in. And it's like, why are we doing this? Why? So, but if you're 17 years old and you're from Honduras and you're selling drugs in the Tenderloin, there should immediately be bells and whistles. Okay, there's probably a level of coercion happening, or if you're between 17 and 22 years old. The getting to the United States from Honduras as a poor person is nothing other than a horrific experience. I mean, and we all know that the stories of the train, the bestia that they call, kidnappings, violence, robberies, extortion, and then most importantly, when someone gets through, they usually always have to pay coyote or someone to help get them into the country. And so but people don't have money up front to pay for that, so they end up in bondage. Why are they leaving those countries? Well, many people have said Honduras is a failed state. The government itself is steeped in corruption. Gangs control massive amounts of territory. The homicide rate is extremely high. And so people don't really have much choice. If you're a young kid in a gang-controlled neighborhood, and you haven't gone to school because the schools are breaking down, there aren't many choices for you as a person. And by the way, the irony of all this is that the United States has been vital in extracting resources from Honduras and Central America and Mexico, and intervening militarily or intervening with intelligence to undermine people's movements in Honduras to advance the society. And so many of the politicians who have benefited from US money and aid in Honduras have actually been involved in drug trafficking. But anyhow, that's a whole nother topic. So you have these kids in these horrific situations who are trying to get out. They are in bondage, debt bondage, when they get through, and then they end up somehow in San Francisco or another urban area, and then find themselves selling drugs. Now, by the way, drug sale is not like, Hondurans do not corner the drug market in San Francisco. Okay. There's this idea that immigrants are bringing drugs. The vast majority of people who are prosecuted for transporting fentanyl in the United States, or any drug for that matter, are US citizens. Okay. There's this idea that bringing over backpacks. No. That's not how big cartels or international drug trafficking organizations work. There have been about 12 Border Patrol agents that have been indicted in the last 5 years for some form of corruption, meaning working with the cartel, identifying a point that is safe to get through. There's corruption. There's a major corruption problem in the Border Patrol. So Border Patrol is actually, if you're a international drug trafficking agency, the Border Patrol is actually a relatively easy barrier to get through, because you just have to find a few rogue agents and know when they're there, and then you just send things through. I wrote an article about this in 48 Hills, and all this stuff that I'm saying, you can just look up. The Department of Justice has websites showing actual prosecutions of Border Patrol agents who have taken bribes from people and have helped people cross, either human trafficking, drug trafficking. So anyhow, there's this idea that if we just deport people, that we'll make an advance on the global drug epidemic. And it's just so absurd. It's like patently absurd. US citizens have proven very, very effective in history of being able to sell drugs and get drugs. I mean, we're talking about $1 billion industry. And we also have a city it's ironic, and I am hesitant to say this as a public defender, but there's this in San Francisco is so funky because it's kind of progressive, it's liberal, and there's this like dynamic between users who we want to help and dealers who we want to throw away. And so users are the saints and dealers are the devils. And it's just like it's patently absurd. It's absurd because it doesn't help where we're going. We're going to have a harm reduction strategy for one group of people, but not for another that also needs harm reduction. It's not conducive. In fact, it could very much contribute to the problems that we have, because what we do know also, I think it's fair to say that as this country has invested in law enforcement to police drugs federally and locally, there's been a similar increase in power in international drug trafficking organizations. And the use of drugs is at an all-time high. And so the more we put into law enforcement, the more violent the drug trafficking organizations get, the more powerful they are, because they always seem to be 1 or 2 steps ahead. And yet, and the solution is just, well, we need more police, we need more prosecutions, we need to put more people in jail. And it's just this cycle that happens. And, I'm not sure if I have any immediate solutions, but what I can say is that we have a shocking and obscene, perverse wealth inequality in this country that leads to addiction and use, because many people in this country don't have access to living wage jobs, decent housing, decent health care. And so it's only natural that in a society with such dramatic inequality, that some people just are not winners in this economy. And the use of drugs and abuse of drugs gets to epidemic proportions, which we have here in San Francisco. And there's no other place in the world that can articulate wealth inequality better than in San Francisco. And yet, even though that's the key problem that we need to be dealing with, we don't seem to really want to deal with it. We just elected a billionaire mayor. Hopefully he's going to be decent. The tech folks seem more interested, and I say tech folks, the tech oligarchs are much more interested in visibility and street conditions as they relate to their enjoyment of the city, rather than helping people get, decent jobs. But I do think, with all that said, I do think there are more and more people who are aware of these phenomena, who are fighting back, who are insisting on having a different construction of what our society should look like.
All right, Francisco, we're out of time. Very interesting discussion. Thank you for sharing the important work that you're doing and your thoughts on the overall system, and maybe even a little optimism, which I will admit I'm in short supply of that.
Yeah. Well, we got to transform how we think about it. We just have to. There's no reason we should just let this thing happen. We can step up, and we did it before. We can do it again. So
this has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next week for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com. That's Justice for George Powell, all one word, .com.